Calling to order the regular meeting of the Planning Commission for Wednesday, February 23rd. Jackie, could you take the roll, please?
Here.
Here. Here.
Here.
Here. Thanks, Jackie. The number one item on our agenda is, the first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. And I'm going to ask that, I think some of us didn't get the minutes for the meeting until this evening or either mailed to us at home today. So I'm just going to ask that we delay the approval of the minutes to our next meeting. All of the items on those minutes were for the City Council to deal with, and I know they're not going to get to this for probably a month or two anyway, so I think we have time to do that. All right, the new business, as you've reviewed our bylaws, and this is our first time to review our bylaws, thanks to our bylaws committee, you'll note that tonight is our annual meeting for the Planning Commission, and so the first thing we're going to do is we have two new planning commissioners. We have Michael Plateter over here to my right, and we have Ken Potts down the road to my left. So welcome to our new commissioners. And what I would do is, and what I'll say is, having been involved in the interview process with the City Council, it was an amazing slate of candidates that applied for these positions, and very highly qualified candidates. And obviously you'll find very soon that we've selected two excellent candidates. So welcome. And what I'll do is I'll ask maybe Ken to start and maybe just give a brief introduction, any background you want to give. And
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Very pleased to be here. I'm the Director of Sustainability at McGough Companies in St. Paul, and that's a position I've been at for about 6 years now after practicing architecture in Minneapolis and also doing a stint for the real estate department at Target Corporation. So it gives me a variety of experiences having to do with planning and development that I'm happy to contribute.
Excellent. Michael?
Sure. It's thank you very much for pointing me to this. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm just thrilled to be here. A little bit about myself and my day job. I also work at Target currently as a project manager in the property development department. And with that position, I've worked on numerous projects around the country, working with planning commissions, cities, sustainability councils. I manage architects and engineers in my workplace, so I'm familiar with development around the country. Been a Edina resident for 12 years and 2 shifts, and I live in the Morningside area.
Great. Well, thanks, Ken and Michael, and welcome again. Excuse me. The other element here of our annual meeting is election of officers, and actually reviewing our bylaws and seeing if we have any changes we want to make. Now, we may have some proposed changes, but I'm thinking in subsequent years there'll be more likelihood of that since we literally just approved them. But if we do have any proposed changes, think about that and we can bring that up in discussion. So the first item is election of officers. As you know, in the past we've had a chair and we've had a vice chair. In our bylaws we talk about a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary position. Now we're not bound to elect a secretary position. We can certainly do that. The actual work entailed for the secretary position, and frankly the staff, the planning department staff are serving the role of the secretary and taking minutes, providing those minutes, all that kind of stuff. Technically, I guess if we were to elect a secretary, they might have documents to sign, but I don't even think I sign documents, so I'm not sure what the secretary would sign. We could find something maybe, but so we can kind of leave it up to this body if we want to, if we feel a need to elect a secretary right now or not. I sent 2 memos out. One memo was in the packet regarding the chair position. I had stated that I'd be willing to serve again if I was nominated, but I was certainly, I want to be very open that I am totally not going to be offended if somebody else would like to serve in this position, and I would frankly encourage it. Then, as I was reading my packet, as you got, and we'll talk about this later, the City Council has adopted an ordinance about commissions and committees in the city, and they specifically talk about term limits for chairs of commissions. And I had known there was at least discussion of term limits, but I had always heard that it was for other commissions, not for the Planning Commission. As you know, the Planning Commission has different term limits for its members than other commissions as well. And part of that is the sort of the technicality of what we're doing, that it takes, there's a learning curve here that's, you know, it takes a while to kind of get comfortable with what we do, and so they're trying to extend the terms a little bit. But the fact is, it's very clear as I read it, and I've confirmed it with the mayor, that it says what it says, and that is the chair can serve 2 consecutive terms. And it took me a while to figure it out, but believe it or not, it's been 2 years since I've been chair. I can't even believe that. It seemed like it just was yesterday. But the fact is, it is 2 years, so it's time for somebody else to be chair. And my apology is that I didn't notice it until literally 2 days ago. So it's not really giving people very fair notice. But with that in mind, I guess I'd like to open it up. If anyone has an interest or wants to discuss it or wants to make a nomination, I would entertain that.
Mr. Chairman, it was sort of my assumption coming into this meeting that we would continue we have had continuity of chair, and I thought we would continue that, and then I was surprised, frankly, by your memo. We have had precedent when John Lonsberry was the chair of this commission. His term, two years were up, but we were in the middle of doing the comprehensive plan, and an exception was made to allow him to continue. A somewhat similar situation exists today. We're in the middle of the review of the zoning ordinances, so it might be appropriate to request an exception of the council to allow you to continue another term. I don't know. One of the things that I'm a little bit concerned about is the information about the term limit caught some of us by surprise, and I'm wondering if there's some way we could continue this issue until the next meeting and have an opportunity to discuss it and think about it and decide, you know, if some of us are willing or interested in being chair or not. Is it possible that we can obtain an exception, whatever. Well, maybe we ought to somehow see if we can postpone that decision until a later time.
I think I'm more comfortable postponing or continuing our annual meeting, which we could do, than I am trying to find an exemption to keep me in the chair. Because I don't want to, you know, it's really important. You know, this body is the one that really helps generate ordinances and recommends them to the council. And the last thing I want to do is find ways around our ordinances. You know, if it says 2 years, then it should be 2 years. And frankly, you know, I've accomplished what I wanted to. You know, we've got bylaws. We're well into our rewrite of the ordinances. We've got a PUD ordinance. We've got sketch plan review. And the other thing I really wanted the Planning Commission to do was to be really user-friendly. I wanted people to come into this meeting room and feel comfortable addressing this commission. I think we are that. And I'm really pleased with what we've accomplished. And I think I look around here, it's really easy being the chair of a commission when you have this quality of people on the commission, and which means that, you know, we've got a lot of candidates to be chair and a lot of people that would bring their own kind of ideas to it, and I think that's the reason the council wants it this way. And sometimes I think what happens is you have a chair that's in position for a few years, and I thought about this when I was saying, well, I'm willing to serve again, but I'm very, you know, it's like you can say that, but I think people are always afraid that, well, I will offend him if and so maybe it's better, you know, that there's just a natural, or maybe it's not natural, there's a forced switch. I think, you know, it's not a bad thing. But I do think the notice given to all of you was quite short. It doesn't give you a lot of time to think about the impacts on your lives or, you know, how you want to approach it. The one thing I will say, whoever may be interested in stepping into this position, is that I'm not going away. You know, I'll still be here to You know, I'll actually share with you what we were in the middle of and how I was thinking about guiding it, so you're not starting with like, oh no, what am I doing on the ordinance update or whatever. So I'll certainly be here to support whoever it is. I think my term on the Planning Commission will end in 2013, so I have 2 full years on the commission to help with whatever. So unless there's somebody that has an interest and would like to put their name forward tonight, we could certainly, I think it's a fair thing to do to just basically, what's the term I'm looking for? Continue, thank you. Continue the annual meeting to our next, because I don't think we should elect a vice chair or a secretary until we have the chair position figured out, and then let everything else fall into place. Any comments on this? Commissioner Scheer.
I had not thought of this, Commissioner Grable's proposal, but I like it because we are missing 2 of our members this evening as well, and I think in terms of this deliberation, it would be really good to have the entire group assembled.
So I would take a motion to, actually what we can do is, why don't we finish a couple. Let me think about how I want to do this. We have election of officers, we have any additions or revisions we want to make to the bylaws, and then just a discussion of our initiatives for 2011. I think we can take the whole bundle and just move it to the next meeting. And I would take a motion from somebody if they wanted to do that.
So moved.
Do we have a second? Second. All right, we have a motion and a second to continue our annual meeting to our next regular meeting of the Planning Commission. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion is approved. Thank you. So much for our annual meeting. So under old business, we're working on our zoning ordinance update, and we had in a work session, which was just was it a week ago or 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago now. One of the topics we had was rooftop dining. Rooftop dining came to us from the council. They had a request several months ago. Well, actually, it's been, what, a year ago now? That instigated the question, you know, what is our policy with rooftop dining? Should we have an ordinance addressing it? And so we introduced the topic at our last meeting, and this is a continuation of that topic. And I'll just let Carrie kind of explain further.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Fisher, members of the Planning Commission. As Chair Fisher pointed out, we discussed this at the last work session. Council put a moratorium on rooftop dining back in, I believe it was late July of last year. We had a request from a restaurant in the 50th and France area to do rooftop dining, and there was concern from the adjacent condominiums down there about the impacts. So the council put that moratorium on for 1 year and asked staff to prepare an ordinance to deal with that issue. At our work session a couple of weeks ago, we considered the option of prohibiting rooftop dining, allowing them as a permitted use, which the current ordinance would allow rooftop dining as a permitted use, or the third alternative as a conditionally permitted use. That seemed to be the direction that the Planning Commission wished to pursue, and you asked staff to prepare a draft ordinance that's in your packet this evening. Also at that meeting, you had asked that we invite Wayne Houle, the city engineer, to come and speak to us and give us a little background about how the public parking situation works down at the 50th and France in our public parking ramps. We wanted to have a better understanding of that in terms of requiring parking for this type of use. So what I thought I might do is, rather than get into the detail of the ordinance, is introduce Wayne, and he can go through his presentation and talk about the parking situation down at 50th and France, and then we can get back into the detail of the draft of the ordinance that's before you.
Thank you, Carrie. And Wayne, thank you for coming here tonight to present to us.
Thank you, Chair Fisher and Commissioners. When I was putting this together for tonight, I was not really covering it for the rooftop dining, but I was covering it more for the parking on 50th and France. And because I've always been asked the question, how did these parking ramps come to be down at 50th and France, and how does the city actually are able to keep the parking ramps going and charge back to the businesses and such. And so I thought, actually, this is going to be a great presentation or a packet that I'm going to put together and actually have a final report in a few weeks on it that I can then hand out to the 50th France Association, the business owners, developers, anybody else that comes into the area. So thanks for kind of forcing me to sit down and actually put this together. Tonight, like I say, I want to talk a little bit about the parking down at 50th and France. What I want to cover here is a little bit of the background, the city code that allows us to do what we do as far as charging back to the businesses. Cover a couple of the, and I'm not going to get into the Grandview area, but I just want to point out that that is one of the commercial areas that we also do the identical type maintenance and charge back to those businesses. And then talk about a little bit of the reimbursement or our yearly assessments, and then get more into detail about the parking availability and some of the studies that we're working on or have been working on for a couple of years that we actually had put on hold and are going to resurrect here and go forward with. And then I'll have any questions at the end of this. The city code 1215 actually allows us, and actually I gave you, should have a packet of information that has a PowerPoint, and then the city code actually allows us per a law that was passed in 1983, a special law that allows the city of Edina to essentially create these maintenance districts. And I think I'm not up on a service district or what they describe as a service district similar to an Excelsior on Grand or the Nicollet Avenue, I believe, has a service district downtown. I believe this is really kind of was the infancy or whatever of those service districts, and I need to do a little bit more research on that. So in that packet, you do have that city code 1215, and then you also have the 1983 law that was chapter 59 that was passed with that. The commercial areas, we only have two that right now that we're maintaining and special assessing back to those businesses is, like I say, 50th and France and then Grandview. The Grandview area is actually it has a legal boundary basically that's defined on this sketch here, and it does include geographically residential homes and from medium density, high density to single family. We do not, part of the assessment policy or practice is that we don't charge back to those homes for what we do in that maintenance area or in that business area for keeping, for instance, the Grandview area is the center medians, the wrought iron fencing, those types of things, is that we maintain those and then we charge that back. So they have a much lesser special assessment than the 50th and France area. The 50th and France is bounded by France Avenue, 51st on the West 51st Street on the south, and then essentially the U.S. Bank lot property line on the west and the property line on the north side of 49th and a half Street. Once again, in this district too, the 5,000 France with the residential units in there, we do not charge back to those residential units. We only charge back to the commercial uses in this area. So what are we responsible for when I talk about charging back? One is on the 50th France, we have 3 parking ramps and 2 surface lots. We have anything that's from the front of a building to the curb line, essentially, which is the streetscape that we maintain and then assess back to the property owners. So anything with the street furniture, bike racks, the lighting units, the pavers, the planter areas, the granite planters that we're constantly fighting some of the folks that will go out and skateboard or on there that we have to replace those panels. So we charge that back to the business owners. What we do is it's a yearly assessment. So every year we tally up the numbers, and then in the fall, September, October is when we do our final assessment hearing, and then we charge back. And you can see kind of it's actually over the last 10 years or so, it's steadily increasing, and that's what's increasing those costs is everything is slowly deteriorating. The pavers are deteriorating. If you go down there now, you'll see a lot of pavers missing, and we're just putting winter mix into those areas. But we do have, you'll see in a minute here, we do have a plan that we're going to be going through and replacing all the pavers and basically keeping the same character. We're not changing the character of this, of the 50th in France. The business owners, the business association really wants us to keep it the same, but just update it so people aren't tripping and things on that. To put this in kind of a relative as far as per building, so for instance, like the Lund's grocery store is around $23,000 a year that they kick into the assessment amount or the maintenance for the ramps and such. The Edina Realty building is around $10,500. We even charge ourselves the Edina liquor store, since we own that property where the liquor store sits, $4,000. So we even ourselves get charged both at Vernon and at 50th in France. When they did the expansion on the north ramp in 2001, they did a special assessment outside of the maintenance assessment. It was similar to what we special assessed for our roadway projects, and it was a 10-year assessment for that addition on the north ramp itself. Parking availability down in the corner. There's essentially 5 different types of parking that we have. One is contract or permit parking. That's where the employees and the owners of the businesses are allowed to acquire a permit to park, and I believe it's fairly inexpensive, like $45 a year or something like that, I believe. And then we have zones that are 2-hour parking. Typically, when you drive into the ramps or in the surface lots, those are 2-hour parking, and then we have areas of 5-hour parking, which is more upper areas of the ramps. And then we have the top level of the ramps. The south ramp is permit parking or 5 hours and beyond. The middle ramp is just 5 hours and beyond on the top level, and then the north ramp is virtually all permit parking on the upper part. So we have around 1,000 spaces of public parking spaces at 50th and France. If you look at the private parking that's on the Lund's lot, the U.S. Bank, U.S. Postal Service, behind Houghton's Cleaner stuff, it brings it up to about 1,283 spaces down at the corner. The different ramps, I'm going to go through the 3 different ramps in the surface lots. This is the south ramp, and this is looking north, kind of a bird's eye view up in the upper left corner here. It's accessed off of 51st Street. There's an in and an out that brings you all the way through the ramp off of 51st, and then the lower area that's permit parking, and now with the valet service that's being offered off of France Avenue, they're using the lower area, a portion of the lower area for their valet parking of parking the vehicles. And then you also have an access which is pretty unique. In front of the Lund store, there's a one-way going into the ramp, and that's actually a dedicated city easement or city street through that area. Up on the upper right hand is an isometric that shows the circulation and the parking of the ramp to kind of give you a better idea. Some of these ramps, this is a fairly level ramp, but when you get to the middle ramp, you'll see when you start getting the angles, it's kind of hard to visualize the ramps. This one has 409 spaces in the ramp approximately. The middle ramp, like I say, it's a tough one to visualize when you're standing on the roadway itself. But there's an in and out exit off of 49th and a half, and then an in exit on the west side off of the surface lot, and you just circulate up to the ramp. That has 338 parking spaces. The north ramp, this is looking northbound here, or northward, 49th and a half. You can see the middle ramp, a portion of it, where my little arrow is at there. This one actually has an in on the east side of the ramp and out on the west, and then on behind here through the Houghton Cleaners lot is a inbound at that location. That has 255 spaces in that ramp. The 2 surface lots, the one at 49th and a half in Halifax has 36 spaces, and then the row of parking right by the liquor store or the white building, or as I refer to the L. Larson building, owns that building, has 15 parking spaces. So in your packet you have this that kind of pulls all the different ramps together and the total parking spaces of the public parking spaces. Some of the items that we're looking at, and I know that you've been looking at the rooftop dining and the parking demands for that, but when Salute came in, Carrie and I had been talking and said, boy, we need to get our arms around when the restaurants come into this area or other uses come in, just to see what kind of parking we have. 'Cause if you remember, in 2007, up to 2007, it started getting pretty congested down there, especially Friday and Saturday nights. And we had actually, we work with Walker Parking that has designed and built and inspects these ramps. Had worked with them to put in a counting system essentially, so I could get some dynamic signs that would say ramp full and have some directional arrows that would push them into the middle ramp or the north ramp itself. So we have some of those sitting on the table. And then we also looked at bringing them in and said, how do we get our arms around this whole parking things with the different uses? And so they came up with it's a draft report right now, a shared parking model. And so I'm resurrecting that. I've talked to Walker Parking to get them back on the scene to change up the uses that on the different buildings that we have today and update that. And then we're also working on some capital improvement programs, items down there also. One is the streetscapes, is to upgrade the streetscapes. We upgraded the planters on Long 50th. There's 4 black granite planters, and we upgraded those last year. Basically tore out virtually all the mature vegetation. We left some of the trees in there, but took out all the vegetation and replanted it. And then we also have a plan, the planters along the middle ramp on the south side of the middle ramp to replant those this coming year, depending on what happens to the middle ramp. And part of that is to try to get some irrigation to all the trees, some conduit, trying to get some electrical outlets so we don't have the extension cords going between the trees and such down there. And then also the other item is looking at the parking ramps, is to say, okay, what do we want to do with this parking demand, and how many more spaces do we actually need? So when we looked at, and these are a couple of the graphs from the shared parking model. The one on the left is actually a weekday graph, and as a civil engineer, I get excited because this looks like a ADT on a highway, basically, is when you look at the demands going through, and it's virtually the same thing as going for a parking ramp, is how much demand do you have going in, or the cars going in and out of a parking ramp. So basically, the midway point here is this is about 12 noon, or the lunch hour, and on the right side here for their weekends is what they were predicting was the lunch hour and the dinner hour was peak. I think we're seeing more of this on the right side most of the days of the week, except for probably Monday, Tuesday, down at 50th in France, where the lunch hour are real busy, and then the dinner hours are real busy. And the other item that's on these that are real helpful is the green line at the top, and that's the capacity that you have there. So as the yellow line, which you can barely see here, but this is peaking over that capacity, and even if it's like 10 or 20 cars, that's 10 or 20 cars at the lunch hour that are circulating around, getting frustrated and possibly going elsewhere in the future. So we're trying to say, do we need to add 100, 200 spaces to the ramps? If there's any of the ramps, we're looking at the different ramps that we could actually add on or rebuild or whatever down there. Or is there other means that we could shuttle employees, or the 50th and France Association looking at, well, should we shuttle people in and out of the area to free up some spaces for the customers? So there's a lot of things that we're doing it right now with the association to address the parking issues.
Wayne, when you use the term shared parking, and when I hear the term shared parking, that usually means, it's like a church property and a commercial property that has alternating peak times that you might, how does shared parking apply to this?
I think that the way that they looked at it, meaning the Walker Parking folks, is that the shared parking means that any business can, the customers or employees can utilize the parking ramps. They're not dedicated. So it's real similar to the easements that we have at Centennial Lakes on all the parking lots around Centennial Lakes, is that the park users are allowed to use those parking lots. I think that's the way that they looked at it. The other item is like I say, the streetscapes. Is we do have a kind of a master plan to upgrade, bring those back up to the way they were prior. When I was pitching a lot of these things a couple of years ago with the downturn in the economy, imagine the the response I got back from the business owners and the landowners down there. So we've been keeping at it, and we've actually been meeting about every other month with the land property owners just to keep them on track, and they're enthused about doing something. They don't know quite yet what it is. And then on the ramps itself, a couple of years ago, I think it was 2008, right after the 35W bridge collapsed, a lot of us that had parking ramps or responsibilities and bridges and stuff, we started looking at those. Even though per city code we have these inspected every year, but my comments was, when do I need to replace this parking ramp? What kind of dollars are we looking at in the future? So we actually had Walker put together a 50-year maintenance budget forecast, and they've identified the approximate years that we'd be looking at replacing the ramps. And they're showing 4 ramps here because that's what we have inspected at the city here. We include the Jerry's ramp also. So we're, and behind these numbers there's multiple spreadsheets that covers exactly what goes into those other numbers. But we're looking at quite a few years out for the south ramp, and then the middle ramp, and then the north ramp is beyond this, the 50 years for replacement. That's kind of what we're at right now, kind of the past practice that we've done down at 50th and France. And with that, I'll take any other questions you have.
Commissioner Potts.
Have you done traffic studies recently to accompany the ramp use to understand the level of service at the intersections, and look, is that information you would weigh into some of the decisions?
Yes, we, Commissioner Potts, a couple of 2005 to 2007, we did a study called the Northeast Edina study, and part of that study was looked at the intersections and actually to realign some of the travel lanes, especially on France Avenue and a little bit on 50th Street, to improve the level of service. So that I don't know if it totally relates back into the actual parking, but if it's totally congestion, you can't get to the parking ramps, and it's useless to have the spaces. But we're still working with the city of Minneapolis to see if we can restripe, especially the France Avenue northbound, southbound, to alleviate that chicaning or that meandering, especially at 49th and a half Street.
Yeah, could you expand a little bit on the attempts to collaborate with the city? Do we understand how the different merchants collaborate or work together across France Avenue?
There's a core group called the 50th and France Business Association, and that actually encompasses businesses from the Minneapolis side also. They're part of members of the 50th and France Association. So that's kind of the key to coordinating between the two groups of people. The council member in Minneapolis has actually worked with our mayor and now our new manager. Actually worked with Gordon. He was also in the past, but has met with Scott Neal to see if there's something that could be done over there. And they're exploring different items, service districts or whatever, to help alleviate some of the parking demands. But Minneapolis has a little bit different philosophy than we have on their parking ramps. They're kind of in the business to get rid of their parking ramps. We still want to have our parking ramps. So it's a little conflicting interest there. So as far as the parking goes, like I say, the striping, the one issue is in order to move over the striping or to have so you're not meandering at 49th and half is actually to take on-street parking away from the Minneapolis side. Basically from about midway between 51st and 50th all the way to the north. Mm-hmm. And they really have a really rough time of approving that. So we've asked the question once again here because the county will be mill and overlaying France Avenue from 54th, a little bit north of 54th up through 49th and a half this coming summer. So I've asked the question one more time: is can we restripe that so that it flows a little bit better?
Okay, just one last question. In our packet, the parking ratio for our district, I think I saw 3.2 per thousand. Do we understand what it is in Minneapolis? Are we?
That's more of a planning. I guess we can find out what Minneapolis has for parking and get back to you.
Just curious to get a sense of how many people are parking in the ramps and shopping the whole district, or?
I think we support a lot of the customers that do come to the Minneapolis businesses in our ramps. But we're hoping, though, that they actually spend some time on our side of the street, spending money too.
Of course.
Yeah.
I guess you can look at that two ways. On the one hand, ooh, what are they doing parking in our ramps? But the chances are, they're going by all of the Edina businesses and the restaurants. I mean, I think
Right.
part of this is, I look at this as a really good problem. I mean, it's great to have a successful business district that people want to be spending time in. And, if you think about the really wonderful places that we all like to go, more often than not, there is an element of frustration because everyone wants to be there trying to find the right parking spot. And, I used to live up in Duluth, and Canal Park was always this source of frustration because, it's hard to find a parking spot. Well, it's because everyone wants to be there. That's a good thing. And you're just trying to find that balance, so people don't, they don't stop coming. But and if there's any other questions, we can take that. But I just want to remind everyone what we're really, our charge here is not to solve the parking problem at 50th and France. It's really to weigh in on, do we want to make some specific recommendations on rooftop dining, which, of course, could very likely be located in places other than 50th and France. I think this is a great example to, kind of get at what the issues are here. But at the end of the day, part of what we have to discuss is what's the impact on a project level, if you allow rooftop dining. What is that impact, no matter where you are? In this case, we have some very specific parking issues, so we can entertain some questions. But I just want to remind everyone. Commissioner Forrest.
Yeah, this did come up as an aside to that other discussion, but on the other hand, now we have the opportunity because we have Director Houle here, so that's a good thing too. I'm wondering, looking at the information we got in our packet, we had a report that was generated in 1983, and then we have former city manager Hughes' report that was, when was that?
2005, I think.
Yeah, 2005. And it appears that these numbers on this Walker Restoration Consultants, their report is from 2008, and there's been a marked increase in traffic and parking issues, I think, down there in the last year, maybe even, partly maybe because of the increased number of restaurants. Where did the ratio, this 3.2, come from that was mentioned earlier? It's the same one that was used in the 1983 report, and I'm wondering, is there any difference made between restaurant dining facilities and other types of services and retail and office spaces regarding parking? How that ratio is affected. Also noting that between 2007 and 2000, or right around 2007, after the improvements over there, the square footage overall went up over 16,000 square feet. So I'm just kind of trying to get a picture of what changes have happened and how we're looking at it, I guess.
Yeah, I can probably answer a little bit of your question there. The changes that occurred on that spreadsheet is actually at 5,000 francs. If you recall, they basically infilled the Arby's circulation with that project. So that was the infill. As far as the parking ratios, I don't. It's kind of not really my field of expertise as far as the ratios and those. I'd have to go back to the Walker folks unless Carrie knows as far as that goes.
Yeah, I don't know specifically how that 3.2 was arrived at, but you do see it repeated over and over various years, and people that had studied that. And you might note in their goal was to attract restaurants to the area because parking was not as much of a problem back then, but they wanted to encourage restaurants into the area at that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess to follow up, in general, do we have different parking ratios for restaurants versus other types of commercial businesses?
That is correct, yeah,
Okay.
right.
And is
So
it-
the restaurants are generating more parking, need for more parking than your typical retail establishment. But the way that it's always worked down there is it's all just lumped together as retail space, whether it's a restaurant or just a retail user.
It's a vibrant place.
Commissioner Platisher?
Yes, she asked my first question, but my second question was, do you know the level of service right now in the parking ramps? Did Walker give you the level of service that they currently have?
No, I don't know that.
Okay.
Good question, though. I would imagine that it's obviously will vary throughout the day. And on those graphs I would imagine that as you hit getting closer to that capacity, obviously the level of service is going down.
Commissioner Scheer?
Mr. Hull, I'm looking at a chart that was included in my packet, 50th and France parking availability, February '06. And how often do we redo these?
That one there. Yep. Actually, we were doing going through the ramps every couple years for the most part. After '06, '07, it kind of fell off. I mean, with the economy dropping off, and we were concentrating on other projects and such, is that we haven't been back through to do an actual count in the ramp sense.
Okay, that was my first question, is was there anything more current? And then the second one, if we ever are going to redo this, it would be useful, I think, now, particularly with the large number of restaurants that we have. We do a 9:05 in the AM, 12:45, and a 3 in the afternoon, I'm assuming.
Yes.
It
yeah.
would be very interesting to have a count over the dinner hour,
Right, exactly.
and very
Yep.
meaningful, especially now with the proliferation of restaurants in the area.
Yep.
Is there any plan to redo this?
Not right now. It's pretty labor intensive to go through to do this, and we do not have that in our budget to do. Well, hopefully, when things start freeing up, is that we can do a little bit more. What I anticipate doing this spring, though, is actually using our counters and actually count the amount of vehicles that are coming and going out of the ramps, and we possibly can place the counters in different areas of the ramp so we can capture the areas that people are parking or at least coming and going, essentially. So,
It is interesting, as you look at this chart, the occupancy is high. You know,
Yes.
even in the '06 timeframe that you looked at, and not going any later than 3 in the afternoon.
right. Right now, what our observations are is the south ramp is virtually full midday, and then it drops off, and then the lunch hours or the dinner hours, it fills up again. And then actually the middle ramp, which is actually closer walk if you're going to the theater and some of the other restaurants and such, it's actually closer to park in the middle ramp than it is to park in the south ramp and walk up to 50th. The middle ramp, what we're observing on like a Friday, Saturday nights, is that it's probably about 80 to 90% full. So which leads me to believe that we really need to go back and actually
I
study
think
this.
it would be
but-
useful. I think this is a very useful way to look at it.
Commissioner Grable?
And do we have any kind of feel for what the capacity is in the private ramps? The old First National Bank and the post office, and then the bank at the corner of 51st and France. You know, what kind of capacity issues do they have with their parking lots?
I know the Lund's parking lot is pretty full all the time. The U.S. Bank, they actually have the offices up above that actually park during the day, so those are full during the day, but in the evenings, those are virtually empty. And actually, right now, the valet service for their overflow parking on the weekends is using the U.S. Bank lot as their overflow.
Commissioner Forrest?
I just, you had mentioned permits for employee permit parking, and I'm wondering how many of those we are currently issuing. In one of our old reports, it was 650, and that's more than half of the parking spaces at that time when things weren't so busy, and I'm wondering if that number has dropped at all in recent years.
You know, that was one thing I wish I would have done today. I was thinking on it on the way over here is to grab the number of permits. I can get back to Carrie on that, but I don't believe it's anywhere near the 650 permits that was back then. Because the association has had discussion on the permitting of employees and trying to get the employees so that they're not parking in the 2-hour or 5-hour and going out and moving their vehicles around so they're not getting ticketed.
The one thing that really struck me in reading through the report is that there really are a lot of employees parking in those ramps. And one thing, the least expensive thing you can do to create capacity is figure out creative solutions for the employee parking. That doesn't involve building more infrastructure, whether it's a shuttle from wherever, I don't know. But there are some options there that I'm guessing people will look at some point.
Yeah, there's an actual parking committee that's been established with the 50th and France Business Association that they're looking at shuttling, transit use, giving some reduced or even paying for the transit rides in and out of the corner for the employees. So they're actively, because they need to solve this issue, so that people don't get frustrated and go shopping elsewhere.
Commissioner Carpenter.
On the subject of the parking, one of the things that we're going to be talking about today, probably right after we're done talking with you, relates to the off-street parking with respect to these rooftop dining areas that may be coming in, particularly in that area. And I was kind of curious if you had any thoughts or any information that you could share with respect to the intensity of use of a restaurant attendee that uses parking in that facility versus shoppers, et cetera, to have some understanding relative to what the impact is of adding or requiring, say, 2 or 3 spaces to go along with rooftop. How much does that satisfy the usage versus, doubling that because it's a restaurant, maybe has more intensive use, or less because it has less intensive use?
I haven't thought through that or even discussed it with that. All the questions they're asking tonight, I'll actually go back to the individual that put together the shared parking model that actually resides out of Chicago, out of the Walker office in Chicago, and has done stuff nationwide. I think those are some great questions. I'm not sure if you're looking for an answer for tonight, but
just
which
hoping.
you probably are. But
Oh, just take a guess.
Yeah. So, sorry.
Any other questions for Director Hill? Commissioner Platter.
Yes, do you know if employees on the Minneapolis side also get contracts to park in these ramps?
No, they have to be an employee on the Edina side
Okay.
to park in, to actually get a parking permit.
Okay.
There actually is a surface lot just on the east side on the Minneapolis side that is typically employees of the Minneapolis businesses that park in that surface lot.
Commissioner Grable.
What are the, you obviously meet with the businesses there on a fairly regular basis. What are they saying about the parking in that area?
For the folks that I've been meeting with see that there is an issue, and they'd like to resolve the issue of the parking issue. Like I say, that either with the shuttling or adding onto the structures or doing something in the area with the parking issue. But they do recognize, yeah, this is an issue.
Commissioner Forrest.
Is the Lunds lot, is that their property?
It is. The majority of the Lund's lot, except for the row of parking in front of where the liquor store and the Starbucks and Breadsmith is owned by Lund's.
Because there is a fair amount of grocery store use of the parking ramp behind there as well. So.
Commissioner Rock.
When you make reference to shuttling, have you identified areas that people are, like concentrations of people are coming from, so it would be viable to provide a shuttle for those people? Or are you referring to like a general bus that would go up and down the France area, perhaps, picking up people from those businesses?
Yeah, that's the one thing that the parking committee is putting together, is to identify where the people are coming from, essentially, so that if they're going after the shared use of maybe a church lot or something that they can park in and then shuttle them in. is that they're not driving through the corner to add to lower the level of service on the roadways and on the corner. So trying to get them on the outskirts and then shuttle them in.
Could actually be a good revenue source for a church, for some at least weekday kind of opportunities. Commissioner Grable.
This is a really hypothetical, and maybe you're not even comfortable answering it. But if it came to a situation where you were going to add a level to one of the ramps or do something like that, would that be something that you would expect to be assessed against the business owners in the area, or would that be financed some other way?
Right now, we're actually going through and developing some concept plans to potentially add a level to one of the ramps. And I'm working through the numbers that what the special assessed costs would be to the homeowner, or to the homeowners, to the businesses at 50th and France. So yeah, it would be directly assessed back to the businesses. I don't believe there's another funding mechanism that we can use there to offset that expense.
Commissioner Scheer.
When you alluded to this earlier, but do you know, now that the valet parking service has been added in front of Salute and Barrio there, which seems to be used by a lot of people, I've observed as I've been in the neighborhood, are most of those cars going in the lower part of the south ramp?
There's two locations. During the lunch hour, the valet services are using the upper level of the north ramp, and so that they're not into the middle ramp or the south ramp. In the evening hours, they're using the permitted parking on the lower part of the south ramp, where it's permit parking up to 6 p.m. And they're only using about 50, 60 spaces of the 70 or 80 spaces down there.
And if they were not using those spaces, no one would use those spaces?
We didn't, in the past, we didn't see a lot of people parking in that lower level for some reason. And so that's what we thought, is that would be a good spot for the valet parking, because it's an easy right through the stairwell, down the alleyway to where the valet stand is.
Yeah, it's quite a hike to the north one.
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And even more of a hike to the U.S. Bank lot.
Yes, thank you.
That's why the valets are in such good shape. Any other questions for Mr. Houle? Thank you very much, Wayne. Appreciate your time. Do we want to, does anyone want to, why don't we take a little bit of discussion on the rooftop dining? Carrie had said that they put together a draft ordinance, and maybe taking in a little bit of the information we just gathered, we could, I don't think we have to resolve this tonight, maybe just continue the discussion for a little bit, and then we can continue it as we discuss our ordinance items. Commissioner Rock.
I have a quick question about this ordinance. In Section 3, Subdivision 6, letter B, number 1 and number 3 are the exact same. So I just want to make sure someone noticed that.
That's the same thing. Was that just a
Yes,
drafting
yeah.
error?
We caught it on Monday. Both Roger and I were looking at this, and neither one of us caught that we had it in there twice. But
I just thought it was doubly important.
Right.
So as an item, so it was a good catch, Matt. Commissioner Forrest.
I'm still wondering why, because rooftop dining would be seasonal, why we aren't considering this along with sidewalk dining, because there are a significant number of tables added at least in the 50th and France area during the summer months outdoors, but it is weather and season dependent. So here we're looking at the amount of space on rooftops and looking at it like it's an ongoing issue year-round, and yet we're not doing that with the sidewalk dining. So I'm just wondering why we're separating it out.
Carrie, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, part of where we came up with the 20% is the sidewalk dining that we see up there is less than 20% of the square footage of those restaurants. So to go beyond that, In particular, thinking of the proposal that was down there, it was going to include a kitchen, a bar area. It was essentially doubling the size of the restaurant below. That to us seemed to be, that's going to generate trips to the site rather than having an alternative for someone who's going to that restaurant, whether they sit inside or out, when there's a limited number of chairs. So that was the thinking there in the 20%.
One of the things we talked about regarding this at our work session was also that as a city, it seems we should be encouraging sidewalk dining because it really adds to the ambiance of our business districts. It really is, it's what is creating the vibe. You want to be there because there are people there. And the whole idea of rooftop dining, I think, is a nice amenity. I think you would have fun dining up there, but it doesn't necessarily enhance the quality of life in the district because you don't really notice what's happening up there. So I think there is a distinction that way as well, along with the idea that certainly sidewalks are just, it's like Carrie said, it's much more limited in space. So Carrie, your take on this draft is basically taking and I can't remember if we actually talked about 20% or if you just arrived at that in your discussions with Roger. I mean, it's good, start someplace and see if it feels right. Is certainly something worth doing.
Right. Yeah, we didn't arrive at a number at the last meeting, and that's exactly where we wanted to start at a point. And it seemed 20%, though what we're seeing with the sidewalk dining that we have now is under 20%. So that was the thinking there. I could just quickly go through the conditions.
Yeah, I think it's worth just going through it. And,
Sure. And a lot of these were arrived at from our discussions at our last meeting. So the rooftop dining, it would need to be accessory to an indoor restaurant within the same building. We had discussion on that one. It may not have kitchen facilities or a bar facility on the roof. We've talked about the outdoor dining. Larger than 20% of the principal indoor dining restaurant must provide parking spaces for that additional space. We're suggesting a 50-foot setback to residential. We didn't arrive at any number. We talked about should we even have that requirement. We noted in the survey of other cities, it ranges anywhere from a 20-foot setback in Minneapolis, Minnetonka, and I believe Bloomington had 100 and 200-foot setbacks. So we're just suggesting a starting point again with a 50-foot setback to residential. Hours of the dining would be limited to between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m., and we built in some flexibility given an individual circumstance as part of a conditional use permit. There would be no speaker or amplified sound, and there could be no storage of food or beverage. And again, this would be a conditionally permitted use in our PCD2 districts. That would essentially entail the Grandview district and the 50th and France area, as well as the interchange area at 77th and Highway 100. There's the Shell gas station, Burger King, and the little convenience center. Those all hold PCD2 zoning districts. So that's just a quick summary of the draft that's before you.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Carrie, with respect to the it's 85008P restaurants except within shopping centers, we have a requirement to add additional parking spaces, and I'm curious how that's done. Does this include areas within the 50th and France area? Would this be captured by that?
This would be the parking requirement for all restaurants within town.
So if within 50th and France, I'm making a judgment that may not be 100% correct, but maybe reasonably close. If there is no other available space for parking, does this have the functional equivalent of essentially denying rooftop dining in that area?
It would prevent rooftop dining in many instances beyond 20% where they would have to provide parking. Unless, the way the parking works up there is businesses within the 50th and France can go up to a floor area ratio of 1.0. With the floor area up to that point, the parking can be provided in the public ramps. Anything over a 1.0 to a 1.5 FAR, they need to provide the parking on their site. So if an existing restaurant, the square footage is well below the FAR of 1, and they're adding that space, the potential would be there that they could rely on parking within the ramp for that increase in square footage over the 20%.
Okay.
So it may prevent it at some sites, and it may be available at others.
Commissioner Grable.
You mentioned several areas where this would be in effect, the PCD2. Outside of the 50th and France area, where there's a condominium at the corner of 50th and France, would the 50-foot setback affect any of the other areas?
It would not. There's no residential areas.
So the 50-foot setback is put in, presumably put here specifically for the condominium at 50th and France. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say. Now, residential uses are a conditionally permitted use within that zoning district, within those other zoning districts
Right.
and areas. So residential could be introduced at a later date.
But no businesses came to the city and said, we want some kind of restriction put on residential development in this area, but we're responding to a residential development saying that we want to put some restrictions on the business in this area. Is that fair to say?
I think that's fair.
Thank you.
But the way this is worded right now, would the condo development at 50th and France be considered residential?
It would.
So it's not within 50 feet of residential zoning, it's within 50 feet of a residential use, even though it's in a mixed-use district designed to have restaurants and other such things?
Correct. Yeah, the city attorney and I had many different iterations of that, number 1 and 3 that appeared twice. We were wrestling with that very issue.
Because, if you think about this, if we had a warehouse district and you wanted to all of a sudden come in and build loft housing, then you would eliminate your neighbor's opportunities for business. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Or in this case, when we approved the condos at 50th and France, they actually needed a change in our rules to allow that use to happen in a business district, which was an obvious and a great thing to do, to have mixed use. But then all of a sudden the mixed use starts reducing the opportunity for the mixed use, which is kind of weird. Commissioner Potts, did you have a question?
Yes, I think similar to Commissioner Carpenter's question about whether some of this language might effectively prohibit the rooftop dining use. Let me work into that by saying I was not at the work session, so I'll apologize if this is repetitive. We discussed whether there was potential conflict or competition between sidewalk dining and rooftop dining, and I appreciate the language in this of that 20% area on the roof. But then I'm also thinking about just the cost to meet codes of putting dining on a roof versus dining on a sidewalk is dramatically different, and is only allowing 20% just a showstopper for a restaurateur who has to put in an elevator and stairs and all that sort of thing.
It potentially could. We have had inquiries in the past about wanting to do rooftop dining, and that's usually what's tripped them up. They haven't been able to meet building codes to get elevators, stairwells, to meet fire and building codes. If they can't provide additional parking on their site, this ordinance would prohibit that use.
Well, and I think I could, I'm pulling a number out of the air, but a restaurateur may say, well, I need to seat 50% of what I have on my main floor up on the roof just to justify the cost in a, return on investment sort of scenario.
Yeah, and if they exceed the 1.0 for their FAR, they would have to provide the parking on their site.
Commissioner Forrest.
The 20%, now, you said we came up with a number that seemed reasonable for the language, but is that related at all to what is typical of the restaurants that are currently there? Are they very far under 20%, or are we drafting this around because it's a comfortable number for current sidewalk dining?
It is a comfortable number for under sidewalk dining. If the commission thinks 50% is appropriate, 80%, I don't know the magic number. It just seemed that to provide a rooftop dining, say for instance the barrio where the square footage is about 6,000 square feet below, and they wanted to spread out rooftop dining all across the entire roof, that is going to generate the need for parking. And given our shortage, our issues that we're battling down there at 50th and France, it would seem appropriate that we should require parking. And if they can't provide that, is that a use that we want to introduce down there? Basically an expansion of the restaurant that's going to generate trips down there, make the existing problem even worse.
Commissioner Forrest.
Chris, we're talking about parking. I mean, if you have 20% more tables in any one day, then you've also got probably increased staffing, more employee parking, and all of those things too. And I'm still, I understand the rationale, and I don't entirely disagree with it, but it still seems like it's a little bit unfair. It's like we're using a different standard.
Commissioner Potts.
Could we get a sense, based on some of the precedents you cited of other rooftop areas, what their ratios are? What's on the roof versus what's on the main floor?
Existing rooftop?
Like, I think you referred to some uptown restaurants that have rooftop dining areas, just to give us a sense of what's going on in other communities.
In Minneapolis? Yeah, the ones that I visited, I would guess they would far exceed the 20% standard. They take up the entire roof.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just looking at the time, and we're not going to, come to any conclusion on this tonight. Is there any information that you'd like Carrie to come back with for the next time we discuss this? And Carrie, just let me confirm, are we on a deadline with this? Is the council waiting for this to come back?
The only deadline is the expiration of the moratorium, which I believe is July 31st. So
Okay.
I think we're still fine to take another month or two.
All right. So I'm hearing concern about the 20%. Commissioner Grable.
What would the situation be if Barrio, for example, rather than asking to put rooftop dining in, wanted to put a second floor in? Now, there might be I presume, some setback requirements, perhaps, that they'd have to deal with. But would there be a consideration of parking if they decided they wanted to put a second floor on their restaurant and have dining on that second floor? Would we be having the same discussion?
We would. Excellent question. They would be allowed to expand up to 1.0 for their FAR. My recollection was the square footage of the restaurant's roughly 6,000 square feet, and I think the lot is 8,000 square feet. So if those numbers are accurate, they could do a 2,000 square foot addition above and rely on the ramp for the parking. To expand to a floor area ratio of 1.5, which is allowed in that district, they have to provide the additional parking on their site. So those would be the standards we'd look at.
You know, I'm interested in the requirement that they provide it on their site versus proving or having some agreement that they can provide parking that's not in municipal ramps. So let's just say, you know, there's a restaurant, let's just say it's Barrio, that, you know, they want to do this and they have an agreement with the church down the street and they're going to have valet and every car is going to go down there and it's taken care of. Why would we want to say it has to be on the site? Wouldn't we just say you have to prove that you can provide the parking?
We could and do like a proof of parking agreement. It would likely be a variance to the parking standard. I think that would be the vehicle that we would use there. A
I mean,
variance.
there's clearly, you know, you'd have to actually make sure it's being applied that way, which would, you know, cause some issues for the city, I imagine. But, you know, I think for all purposes, if there are existing properties out there, they're not going to be able to provide the parking on site in areas where we don't want parking lots. I mean, the whole point of the 50th and France area is we took it from the Arby's kind of area to, you know, buildings up to the property edges and, you know, a nice kind of urban feel. So it's a little bit in conflict with that. Commissioner Carpenter.
Yeah, I agree with your comments. But I wonder how difficult it might also be to administer. You get people coming from all over the place and, you know, stopping to shop, then go to the rooftop dining, and not likely to go get their car and check it out and move it over to the church lot. But maybe there's a way to do something like that, perhaps by expanding the easements to the church lot so that the church makes, you know, this hypothetical church makes the spaces available, whether it's for, you know, for the restaurant or otherwise, if they can just simply provide additional parking on a generalized basis accessible to the area. I'm not sure how that would happen exactly, but.
No, I mean, you make a good point that administering some of these things could be very difficult. I kind of smile when we're going through this and we make references, for example, to this one particular restaurant. They're probably moved so far past this already. Like, you know what? That was a question we had a year ago. We are so past this. And making references to these churches, and everyone's like, what? Who? What? What are you talking about?
I'm sure there's a church out there wondering what they're going to get stuck with.
I know. It's all hypothetical. Commissioner Platter.
Did you consider any type of screening requirement around here?
Another excellent question. Yes, in fact, we had a condition in there in regard to screening, but it was taken out at the advice of the city attorney that would be something we would look at on an individual basis, and you could have a screening requirement as one of the conditions as part of the conditional use permit, rather than writing in a standard that basically would say, well, if you meet that standard, you know, whether it be by a fence, I don't know what it would exactly be, but then they would be entitled to that use. So the thought was allow a little bit more flexibility through the conditional use process.
Wouldn't you want a statement that some type of screening be required, though? You know, so that people know that it's going to be required, or is it would just come up under the conditional
We
use?
could. Like I say, that was my first inclination, was to have some type of a screening requirement in there, something a little more general. We could take another shot at putting that in there. I agree with you. I think we should have something that at least lets them know up front that some kind of a screening requirement is going to be necessary.
I think we should make them use really ugly rooftop mechanical units, because that's what people would be looking at anyway, instead of people enjoying themselves on the rooftop.
Modern sculpture?
That's what's so funny about this. Like, what are you looking at on a rooftop? It's ugly, you know? So now you'd be seeing happy people. But anyway.
I noticed that on my tour of some of these rooftop dining establishments. They did build fences around the rooftop equipment to screen that ugly equipment from the patrons that are at that rooftop establishment.
Right.
And not so much screening, fences out on the outside that are blocking views of adjacent properties.
Carrie, I have a question on number 4, only because we've just dealt with this. Speakers and amplified sound audible from other properties prohibited. So is that saying you can do amplified sound, you can't hear it from other properties?
Right, correct.
So, because speakers would have to be allowed if you're going to have amplified sound. I mean, it's a little odd the way it's written. It might ultimately just say amplified sound audible from other property is prohibited.
I would think
I mean, the
that says
speakers
same
is just
thing.
a method of getting amplified sound. But just to be clear, you can have soft music on your rooftop. We're not prohibiting that.
Right.
Okay. Commissioner Scheer.
I had not thought about the screening requirement, but now that we've entered the fray, I would observe that if I were a restaurateur, which I am definitely not, I think I would want not to have screening, or I'd like plexiglass from a safety perspective or something that you could see through, because I would want to entice people up from the street. So the question becomes sort of interesting. Do you want it screened, or are you talking about a safety control? Do you truly want it invisible?
The screening that I was contemplating here was just screening from residential uses, not from other commercial uses or from the street.
So what would that be?
I don't know. That's why we concluded on it would be a case by case. Yeah.
It would be a big wall.
I mean, I think about when you talk about the Grandview district, and the one thing I know about Grandview is that elevationally, it's kind of a neat opportunity. If you've ever gone up on the top of that city ramp, the Jerry's ramp, gorgeous views. So if you were ever to have a restaurant in that area that had a rooftop dining, the views would be tremendous, and you certainly wouldn't want to have a wall around you. So, and so it's really, like how far away is this residential? In this case, if it's 60 feet away, you might take extra precautions to make sure you're screening than if it's, 460 feet away. Commissioner Grable.
Conversely, are we going to require that the residential areas put blinds in their windows? I'm troubled, obviously, by the fact that we're treating 2 permitted uses in this district where all of these uses are supposedly permitted. We're giving one use preferential status over the other, and having that use make additional requirements on all of the rest of the uses. And that just does not seem to be the right thing to do. That would be like, should we require Lunds to do something with their parking lot because they happen to be across the street from the condominium that's across the street there? I mean, if you're in that, and likewise, the people at Centennial Lakes complaining about the signage and all that other stuff. If you don't like it, don't move into a mixed-use district. Maybe I'm too simple-minded here, but that's what it seems like to me. It just doesn't seem fair.
Commissioner Platter.
I think I would like to reiterate Chair Fisher's comments earlier on the 50 feet from residential. You may want to consider that it's 50 feet from a zoned usage versus just residential, and that, of course, implies that residential within that district would have special rights compared to other commercial uses.
I think it's definitely worth looking at that and talking to Roger about that.
Yeah, I think he would be comfortable with the regulation that would require at least a 50-foot setback from residentially zoned property.
Right.
What we were trying to craft here was something within that district that's residential. But that change could certainly be made, and he would be comfortable with that, if that's the direction that you wanted to head.
Does it feel like that's something we should look at? I would agree. Commissioner Scheer.
You know, and along with that, it strikes me if we are looking at, to some degree we are, an ordinance that's applying to one property, we have no control over what happens across the street. And if I think of all of the buildings that exist there are probably some wonderful opportunities for rooftop dining. They're low. If they aren't redeveloped, there are restaurants in several of them. And we will have no control over those, and they will be immediately across the street from the condominiums that we're speaking about. So to the extent that we can't control that anyway, it does begin to seem a little odd that we're legislating for a tiny corner.
Well, let's keep in mind, the majority of rooftop dining occurring in that neighborhood right now is at 5,000 francs, right? Or it's in the condos. It's all the balconies. We're all dining outside.
You buy one to have your outside.
All right, I think we've beat this one up enough for tonight. Anything else that we'd like Carrie to bring to us for the next time we discuss this? All right.
If you have any brainstorms or thoughts, feel free to email me.
Okay.
I think
Thanks, Carrie.
what I'm hearing is I'll make some revisions there to the 50-foot, put in a residential zone district, maybe some changes to the speakers and amplified sound, and then introduce some kind of a screening requirement.
And I think the one thing I don't think have quite figured out is the 20%, the whole area thing. And maybe the FAR can solve that, but I think we just have to kind of work on that one a little bit. Okay. The next topic under zoning ordinance updates is an ordinance amending the zoning ordinance concerning notification requirements for conditional use permits.
The council had directed staff to draft an ordinance that reduces the notification requirements for conditional use permits just in regard to our first floor elevation conditional use permit amendment to the code that we just did here a couple of months ago. They suggested that the notification requirement be reduced from 1,000 feet to 350 feet. And so what's before you is an amendment that does just that. And the thinking there was that special conditional use permit provision for the building a new home or an addition that has a first floor elevation that exceeds 1 foot above the existing structure is more of a residential in nature, almost similar to a variance. So they felt that the notification requirement didn't need to be quite as expansive as a typical conditional use permit that we see in a commercial district or a church site, something with bigger impact. So that's the draft that is before you this evening.
So do we have a precedent for the 350 feet? I mean, where did the 350 feet come from?
350 feet is state statute for all conditional use permits. That's the minimum.
Okay.
We had just the city has just chosen to expand on that for conditional use permits up to 1,000 feet. So we're well above and beyond what the state statute requires.
I'm still a little confused, though, as to why there's just one instance that we wouldn't use our standard that we thought was important for everything else. I mean, doesn't that just get confusing from a staff level?
Well, since it's the only instance that we would use that, I'm not sure how many that we're going to see. I think it's one that we can keep a handle on.
And this was specifically requested by the council?
It was.
Do we know why?
Well, you recall when we went through that ordinance, the Millers and Carinos were suggesting a reduction in the notification requirements to be more in line with the variance process. When this went through the council, they did have some discussion on that. When they adopted the ordinance based on your recommendations, That was what the existing code says, is a 1,000-foot notification for all conditional use permits. So that was the ordinance that was passed. They did have some discussion on the potential to reduce it, but that wasn't part of their specific motion. It was given back to staff at a couple meetings after that ordinance was passed.
So when we are meeting as a Board of Appeals and we have a variance request before us and notifications gone out to neighbors, just say it's a 3-inch side yard setback variance, how many feet does that, who's being notified?
200 feet.
200. So that's the point of this, is saying, let's get it as close as we can get to a typical residential variance request.
Correct.
Still staying within the state guidelines for conditional use permits.
Correct.
Now I understand. Okay. Any other questions? Commissioner Forrest.
I like the specificity of listing the particular sections of the ordinances, but I'm bothered by, here again, we're drafting an ordinance after the fact to fit a specific instance that's already there. And I'm wondering, would there ever be any potential other situations in the future where maybe we want to apply this to any CUPs in residential or in particular residential zoning areas, or that are within 350 feet of any residential, whether it's R1 or otherwise? I'm just wondering if there's a way of broadening it without losing its effectiveness or clarity.
Carrie, if I'm understanding it, this is the only CUP that is in a residential district.
With the exception of churches, parking lots for churches.
But in churches, we want, that's usually a bigger neighborhood issue. Right. This is a single, the way this is written, this is about single-family homes.
Correct. It's the only conditional use permit.
So, at first, I just could not figure out why we were dealing with this. And I understand it came from an issue, but it's not just their issue. It's going to apply to anybody that comes with this. And I get it now that.
It's going to be pretty much that type of issue.
Well, it's going to be the one.
A water table issue.
Right. But it's anyone that has a home that wants to rebuild over a foot above where they are today is going to be dealing with this. And what I'm understanding is the council just wants to keep the notification closer to being in line with any other variance requests that we would get for a single-family home, which I guess makes sense. Other questions, or I would actually take a motion if we feel like it's worth approving. Commissioner Carpenter?
Move to approve.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Do we have any other discussion? Commissioner Grable?
Yeah, just one question, just a point of clarification, because I can't recall. Doesn't that ordinance relate to a water issue? Or is it any time somebody wants 1 foot to exceed the 1 foot level?
It relates to anybody that has a water issue, is within a floodplain, or within a stormwater area.
Okay.
So we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 A little more enthusiasm. Do we want to do a roll call? Jackie, why don't you just take a roll call?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
No.
Nay.
Aye.
Aye. We have some spunky commissioners here tonight. I think you just voted no just for the heck of it. Oh, boy. All right. The next item is an ordinance amendment concerning boards and commissions. Now, Carrie, if I understand this right, we don't really have a vote on that. It's already done, right? They're looking for our opinions or comments,
That's
not
correct,
necessarily
yeah.
a recommendation or anything formal necessarily.
Yeah, I think if the planning commission has any issues or would like to suggest some changes here. I think the place to do it would be at our May 5th work session that we'll have with the City Council. We can add that to the list of other recommendations that you've made previously.
Commissioner Scheer.
The objective here is consolidation and standardization?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and they put into code some of their policies.
Right.
And it was very timely, because otherwise we might have elected the chair improperly. So, whew, just in the nick of time. I had one comment when I went through, and the Planning Commission has never really had an issue with attendance. We've never had a member that had to be removed because they didn't meet the attendance requirements. And one of the things that we worked out is that because we added a lot of meetings for the Planning Commission, our work sessions are not counted as regular meetings that, you have to meet the attendance requirement. And it's interesting and this is in 1500.09 paragraph B, removal. It's on page 5. It's talking about any member of a board or commission who fails to attend 3 consecutive regular meetings, or who fails to attend at least 75% of the scheduled meetings in any calendar year, whether regular or joint work sessions with the council, shall be deemed to have resigned. And the only thing I would say is I have a little bit of a problem with the joint work sessions with the council. I understand the council, thinks those are important and we should be there, and they are, and we should. But our regular meetings are predetermined at the beginning of the year, so we can put them on our calendars. We know that it's our job to be there, and we just need to show up. So I have no problem with, you got to make those meetings. Sometimes work sessions with the council can come up with a 2-week notice or less. And we make every effort to be there, but, we might be gone on work or vacation or whatever, and you just can't help it. So that would be my only suggestion, is that they think about that. I'd hate to penalize somebody when a meeting comes up with 2 weeks' notice and you can't be there, which I think is very different than when you know your schedule a year in advance. Any other comments? Commissioner Grable?
Well, depending on what happens with the Zoning Board of Appeals, and I'm looking at section 1506. I guess they're not really changing this doesn't really change the composition of the zoning board, does it? It's as it has been in the past.
And I think that's the way to do it until we meet with them and they take this on.
And then, the attendance requirement would then, there's a zoning board of appeals attendance requirement, and there's a planning commission attendance requirement. So then in 1 month, where some of us might have 3 meetings to attend, if we were on vacation, two planning commission meetings and 1 zoning board meeting. If we were on vacation or something like that, missing all 3 of those would not constitute missing 3 consecutive meetings. Is that your understanding?
That would be my understanding, yep.
Okay. Sure, it could be. I mean, I think what I'm interested in is if we do make the shift to, let's say we become the Zoning Board of Appeals and we have it as part of our, as a component of our regular Planning Commission meetings, then, I guess then maybe it's really 2 meetings a month. And, at some point, if that change gets made, the definition of being a Planning Commissioner is going to change from 1 meeting a month to 2 meetings a month. You're going to know it's on X Wednesday, and it, becomes part of your routine as you accept the job.
We'll meet as frequently as the City Council.
I mean, potentially we'll be a 2-month, or 2 meetings a month commission. Did we mention that to you 2 new people when you signed on for this? I'm pretty sure I mentioned it at the interview, didn't I? If I didn't, it was just my oversight. It's always what you want to find out in your first meeting is that we're going to double your work that we told you about.
tell them about the rest of that stuff, though, right?
Nope, not yet. Any other comments? I mean, I think it's helpful to have it all in one section, and for the most part, I think it's all good. And I'll just ask them to kind of look at that one item as a possibility or concern. All right, I don't think we have to take any action on that one. So that's it for old business. The next item on the agenda is community comment. Since we don't have any community here, we'll skip past that. Intergovernmental business, we have the council connection in your packets. The next meeting dates that we have scheduled is the zoning ordinance update committee meeting. Now this, for the new members, this is sort of our ad hoc, we've been adding, not always every month, but we've been scheduling an extra meeting to talk about the zoning ordinance updates. I can't honestly tell you tonight if we're going to have that meeting or not. I have to talk to staff and just see if we feel like, right now we don't have anything super urgent that we're trying to push through the pipeline. So my inkling right now is to not have that meeting. But right now it's on your calendars, and we'll let you know in the next day or two. If anyone's really, really hoping we have that meeting, you can let me know. So then the next regular Planning Commission meeting is March 23rd. And I know I've discussed this with a couple of you. Originally, at the beginning of the year, this was scheduled for, would have been March 30th, which is smack dab in the middle of spring break. And I suggested that probably wasn't a great idea. We moved it up a week to the 23rd. I know there is at least one, maybe two members of our commission that's going to be a problem for. And there's an example, again, where I think there has to be some dispensation, we'll call it, for the fact that we actually changed the date. It wasn't on the calendar at the beginning of the year. So, Carrie, we'll have to talk about that, and maybe I can relay a message to the council on that or something, and how we're keeping score. I don't want to penalize somebody when they've made plans around our meetings and then we change the meeting dates. But I also don't want to have a meeting during spring break when people are, trying to be gone with their families. So that's it for additional meetings. The only thing is, if somebody is missing on the 23rd, that is going to be our annual, our continued meeting. So if you're not going to be here, make sure if you have an interest in being an officer or a chair or vice chair or secretary, that you communicate that ahead of time. With that, I would take a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
All right, do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.